Hello there. Today we're going to take a really deep dive into Piett Blue. I hope you're going to like this one. We'll cover quite a bit, and I'd be curious to know if you like uh, dives that are quite this deep. Okay, this is my list. We'll get quite a bit into it. One thing to note right away is that I've got Pershing and Super Laser Technicians in the sideboard, right? That's 6 of the 10 cards in the sideboard. The rest are Palpatine's Returns and a couple big Star Destroyers. In the main deck, you've got Outlaw Corona, you've got Iden and Corvus, a couple Prepare for Takeoff, and I'm guessing most of the list looks fairly standard. But we're going to talk about the list as a whole. I want to start with walking through a few potential sequences, okay? So this could be a standard start, and it's a phenomenal start if you can pull it off, right? So on your first turn, you're at 2 resources, you play Inferno 4, and it could be any 2-drop. But Inferno 4 is nice because it helps you dig for the rest of the pieces here, right? So then turn 2, you're on 3 resources, and you resupply, right? Could be a Super Laser Technician. But the point is we're trying to ramp, okay? On turn 3, now we're at 5 resources. We can play a resupply carrier, right? And we can do that whether Piett is flipped or not flipped. But that's going to take us to turn 4 having 7 resources, right? And as long as Piett is flipped at that point, we can play Avenger, right? So it's Avenger in 4 turns, which is pretty nuts. This is a really, really hard start to beat. It can be beaten by decks that are going super wide, right? So if you basically spend your first 3 turns just digging for tools and ramping, Sabine has done a ton of damage to you, or Van Reg has done a ton of damage to you, right? So it's not great against aggro. It's also not great against targeted hand disruption, right? So if you get your resupply carrier out, but then your opponent plays Spark of Rebellion and steals your Avenger, or plays Bazine and gets rid of your Avenger, then you've got a whole lot of resources and nothing to do, right? But against traditional decks, this is a phenomenal start, right? If the deck has Vigilance in it, it can probably get rid of an Avenger, but anything that doesn't have blue, there's very little to come back from for this start. So let's take a different route, right? Turns 3 and 4 are the same, but turns 1 and 2 are a little bit different. We're going to start actually Pershing, then Super Laser Technician. I do like having Pershing and Super Laser Technician together, because one of the problems with the Super Laser Technician, potential problems, is it's a little harder to guarantee that you get the kill in this deck, right? So in a lot of decks like Darth Vader Leader, Emperor Palpatine, Kira, you can kill your own Super Laser Technician pretty easily. In this deck, if you run up against a Von Reg or a Wedge, for example, they might never play a ground unit. And then the Super Laser Technician is not great in that scenario, right? It can also get waylaid. So in general, I actually like Resupply better, which is why I have Resupply in the main deck. But Pershing helps solve that weakness and makes Super Laser Technician about as good as Resupply, maybe a little bit better because you potentially get to draw a card out of the deal. So if we compare to the previous one, right, I'm going to say this is actually worse against aggro, right? Because at least against aggro in this scenario, we have Inferno 4 to do something on the board. Now we literally have nothing, right? We turn 3, we get a ship that's not strong, and then turn 4, we've kill a wing leader or something with our Avenger, right? It's not great. So this is part of why I'm keeping some of these cards in the sideboard, and you'll actually see my preferred start next. But against control decks, this is better than the first start, right? Because Pershing is potentially out there getting you even more value. And a lot of times in control matchups, it's just the person who has the most answers that gets the W, right? So more ramp is important in control matchups, and Pershing getting that extra card draw is important. Here's the start I actually like, okay? And I think this is a bit non-traditional, we'll say, but it's super strong, okay? Turn 1, you play an Outlaw Corona, right? Because this is a capital ship. Piett can reduce its cost to 2, and you start with a 3/5 in play. Now, that's awesome versus aggro, right? Because the 3/5 will trade into anything, right? If your opponent starts A-Wing or something like that. It's also going to be great against aggro because you'll see we're going to build to a sweet Overwhelming Barrage. Okay. Another reason why I really, really like this play is it's great against Tarkentown. So let's say you're playing Quinlan. It's even better against Quinlan, right? Because they can't ping your turn 1 play because it costs 3, right? So even if they play a guy that costs 2, there's no ping, right? Let's change it to Cad Bane Tarkentown instead, right? You play your Outlaw Corona, they play an Underworld card, then they ping you. Traditionally, they would use Tarkentown to take away your first turn play, but because the Outlaw Corona has 5 health, it's still live, okay? Proceed to turn 2, you play Iden on the Outlaw Corona. Now, you have a 6/8 shielded in space, which is nuts, okay? And then on turn 3, you can play Corvus because Piett is going to reduce the cost of Corvus to 4, right? And you can move Iden to Corvus. So this is just nuts. You go from a ship that your opponent can't deal with. Really, the only thing to deal with it is Power of the Dark Side or Merciless Company, Merciless Contract. And then you put a shield on it. You attack for 6 that turn. On turn 2, you attack for 6. On turn 3, you attack for 6, right? So now their base has 12 damage on it. And then you play Corvus and move it over there. So you're left with 2 shielded capital ships if your opponent had a ground start. And then what really adds insult to injury is Overwhelming Barrage on turn 4. Because Corvus with Iden on it, again, it's almost impossible to deal with. And it Overwhelming Barrages for 9. Then it hits base for another 7, restoring 2. Right? So at this point, we hit for 6. We hit for 6. Then we hit for, actually, I said 7, but it's actually 9, right? If your opponent doesn't deal with it. So that's 21 damage to base, removing 9 health worth of your opponent's units, restoring 2, and there's really no way to deal with this, right? Short of some removal or a waylay or something like that. Now, that sounds really exciting. I do want to throw out there that this is horrible against control, right? Because if you play Outlaw Corona, and let's say it's a mirror match, your opponent plays Power of the Dark Side, they probably just win because they've ramped, they've taken away your turn 1 play. If you kept a hand with Iden, now you can't even play Iden, and it's not good, right? So against control, we're siding out the Outlaw Coronas, and we're bringing in Pershing and the Super Laser Technicians. But this is a super, super fun start. And then part of what's fun about this start is it's super strong, but the end game in your deck is still nuts, right? It's not like you fall off after this. No, after this, you play a resupply carrier and then Devastator or something like that. Okay. So I think that's helpful to see the start that we want in the deck. And now we'll go through and talk about more of the cards and where they fall. Okay. I'm going to dive into matchups a little bit. In the mirror, ramp is basically all that matters early. Card draw does matter a bit, right? So a Pershing start is good. But after that, it's really just who ramps the fastest, right? So keep hands with resupply and resupply carrier, pitch anything that doesn't have that. Now keep in mind, Inferno 4 is helpful, right? It helps you to find your ramp, so it's not a throwaway card. Another one is, towards the end of the game, you're going to just be throwing answers at each other, right? It's going to be, I Avenger your unit, you Devastator my unit, I Annihilator your unit, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When that happens, if your opponent's playing Annihilator, a few things to keep in mind. One is whatever of yours gets annihilated is a fantastic target for Palpatine's return, right? So let's say your opponent annihilators your Annihilator. If you can Palpatine's return it back, your opponent theoretically won't have much of an answer, right? Now, it's important to not get Avengered or Power of the Darksided. But at that point, Palpatine's return is incredibly useful, and that's part of why I have them in here. Another one is that no glory only results can be almost a 2 or a 3 for 1 against Annihilator, right? So this is only great if you're super far behind, which is a little unfortunate. But if your opponent has Annihilator out and you play no glory only results on their Annihilator, not only are you defeating their Annihilator, but you also get the when defeated ability, right? So you can defeat another one of their units and trigger the ability to get rid of them from the rest of their deck. So I'd be wary of resourcing the no glory only results in that matchup. Now, if your opponent's not playing Annihilator, no biggie, right? It's just kind of a 1-for-1, no big deal. Okay. Against blue or decks that can deal with the Outlaw Corona, we're probably swapping that out. And because we're swapping that out, the pilots are still good on Inferno 4 or the Onyx tie, but they're not as strong, right? So we care more about ramping and card draw and having those late game answers. So I'm bringing in kind of the small package, pulling out the pilots and the Corona. Okay. Let's talk through basically all the cards in the deck. I've covered a lot about Pershing and Inferno 4. There's a Director Krennic in there. He can make some really interesting plays. You see the Onyx Squadron Brute and the Inferno 4. We also have a Chimera, right? So you can turn 1 Krennic, turn 2 play Inferno 4 and an Onyx Squadron Brute. It's not what we're looking for, right? It's not ideal, but it is something. Another one you can do is direct. Let's say you got just a lousy opening hand. You can play Director Krennic. Turn 2, play Prepare for Takeoff. You can find one of those 2 drops plus that resupply carrier that you needed to ramp into, and you can still get some value by playing one of the 2 drops. So that's pretty good. The Onyx Squadron Brute is great. Against aggro, it's probably more important than Inferno 4. Against control, it's not super important, right? But to help take some pressure off by potentially being able to get that thing killed, remove a couple damage, it's really quite nice. I do like Prepare for Takeoff in the deck, especially given the amount of hand disruption that you're likely to face, right? So against a Quinlan deck, they hit you with an Ahsoka and a Force Throw, and you're feeling bad. But if you have Prepare for Takeoff, you're kind of right back in it. So I really, really like this card. I do find myself playing it quite a bit earlier in the game, but also it's phenomenal late in the game, right? You've played your big unit, and if they've had an answer for it, you can run out of gas in this deck. And so being able to play Prepare for Takeoff to go grab an Annihilator and a Devastator makes it so you have plenty of gas left. And then Entrench is in there for two potential scenarios. One is you really don't have much on the ground in this deck, right? So you can entrench an opponent's leader. That's perfectly legitimate. You can entrench an opponent's Poe, for example. I'd rather be playing Devastator or Avenger to get rid of their Poe. But Entrenched is almost removal in this deck. It's also not a bad option to have around for Piett, right? So when you flip Piett, usually you want him to survive a turn. 2 turns is great. 1 turn is really important. And it's a whole lot more difficult to deal with a 5/10 than it is with a 2/7, right? A 2/7 gets removed pretty easily with no real punishment for your opponent. So occasionally you can sideboard it out, but I do like it in that slot. Okay, the 3 drops. Ramp is pretty much always what we want. Perilous Position is nice to deal with lurking TIE Phantoms. Also pretty good for opponent leader flips, right? So maybe on 6 resources, you want to play Perilous Position and Prepared for Takeoff, for example, to deal with their leader. And then Power of the Dark Side is great. This helps when you get to the end. It's also helpful early. Most of the time it's not the plan, but it can be the plan against aggro, right? You have initiative, you lead an Inferno 4, find something that you want, and then Power of the Dark Side, they're 2-drop to keep them from getting a pump. Still a great strategy. Okay. 4 drops. Corvus is basically a 4-drop, and then Iden can be a 4-drop. I'm usually not happy to play her on the ground. That's not our strategy. But the whole point here is you don't really want 4 drops anyhow, right? You want to skip from 3 to 5. And then another option in the 4 category is just, 2 of these guys. Okay. On 5 resources, you almost always want to be playing Overwhelming Barrage or Resupply Carrier. No Glory Only Results and Chimera are options there. Chimera is not the strongest play in the deck. It's resource from time to time. I do like being able to potentially trigger that when defeated to get an extra heal or an extra search, with the look at the top 2 cards of your deck with Inferno 4. And then the when defeated can be relevant, right? So if your opponent has ways of dealing with these big capital ships, they're probably playing blue. And it's a nice way to protect yourself when you get to that, Power of the Dark Side, Avenger battle in the end, to have a couple ties just to soak, Power of the Dark Side. So I do like one of it in there. Okay, on 6 resources, usually my favorite thing to do is to play the Architens. This is a phenomenal card. I think it was probably even better when Django was super popular, but it's still great. There's usually something to ambush, but even if there's not, this Overwhelming Barrage is for 9, and it's a great card to have around. The reason that was on 6 as well is because usually, we flip Piett on 5, and then, on 6, we're ready to go to the Architens. Now, a lot of times we just like to ramp from 5 to playing, our 7 resource cards. Their Relentless and Avenger are amazing. It's hard to beat, right? That was, I think, the second slide that we started off with was, 2-drop ramp Avenger. That's great. It's hard to beat. I do have Maul in here. There's an argument to be made that maybe Vader could fit in the deck. The 2 and 3 drops aren't that important to us. So I actually prefer in this deck, I prefer them all because it's a little bit more threatening for the leader, right? There's a lot of 7 health leaders, and if you can ramp, you can usually maul into their leader unless they have a sentinel out, in which case you really need to get to your devastator. Okay. If you get to this point, you're usually feeling pretty good. So, once Avenger is out and Devastator's out, Annihilator's just extra fun. This is what Piett does. He gets here faster than anybody else, and hopefully you can end the game when you get to these big ships. Okay, I want to talk about a few other aspects here. You could make an argument to play Colossus in this deck instead of a 30 health base. I think I would be fine with that. It'll definitely, some games, you won't pay for it, and you'll win because you had the extra 5 health. In general, I don't like it for Piett. There is some card draw in the deck. There's not a lot of card draw in the deck. And the other thing is, Piett is really relying on specific sequences, right? I think more than most decks. And if you don't draw your ramp, or you draw your ramp and then your deck bricks out on you because you weren't able to save a big ship, and you get to 7 resources and then you draw a super laser technician and a resupply, you're gonna feel really bad about it, right? So I like having that extra card. To me, the 5 health is not worth it. If I was gonna build that version, I think I'd go to 3 prepare for takeoff for sure, and I'm probably starting Pershing, and I'm just all in on that play. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is when to deploy Piett. Okay. A lot of leaders, the turn that they are defeated, they don't get to use their special ability, right? And Piett is potentially the same. So if you flip him when you don't need to, and then your opponent grabs initiative and kills Piett with their first action, you could potentially miss out on a whole turn, potentially, right? And so it's worth thinking about, do I actually need to deploy him? Let's start with the 5 resource turn. In this deck, the answer is pretty much no. You do not need to deploy him on 5 resources because there are no capital ships that cost 7 in this deck, right? Now, if I was playing yellow and I had Radiant in the deck, or, brought in some 7 cost ships, then there would absolutely be times to flip Piett, right? But if I'm just playing resupply carrier, I can guarantee that my opponent can't mess that up by just using his ability, his leader ability, playing my resupply carrier, and then letting my opponent do stuff, right? Attack with stuff on the ground, take time to do some stuff. It still might be worth deploying Piett that turn, just so that you can play your Avenger or whatever it is on your opening action the following turn. But I will frequently delay that flip, especially if my opponent has a bunch of ready units on the ground that could potentially take him out. I'd rather maintain my discount than lose my leader. Okay. There's a few other cards that tested some and performed admirably that you could consider here. Rival's Fall is certainly a good one, right? You really don't have much to deal with opponents' units in this deck other than just Devastator, right? Devastator makes things fine. To some extent, once you get Avenger out, you're clearing all their stuff away, and then Power of the Dark Side can take care of a leader. Overwhelming Barrage can take care of leaders because you're going to end up with really big ships, right? Now, if a leader gets a shield, then Rivals Fall really becomes the way to go. But ultimately, I found that opponents' leaders were usually irrelevant because if my game plan happened, their leader could hit me as much as they want, right? Not so with Sabine, but we have different plans for Sabine. We just have to overwhelming barrage Sabine. Super Laser Blast is an interesting one to consider. In most matchups, I don't think it's good because you are getting to your end game faster than everyone else, and so wiping the board is pointless. The one where it does make sense is against Palpatine, right? Because you get your big thing out, then they steal it, and they have your big thing and Palpatine, right? So there, if you played Rivals Fall on Palpatine, you're still down a big thing, right? So Super Laser Blast kind of helps you get back that 2-for-1 that you had lost. So there is an argument to be made there. Couple thoughts. One is, dodge Palpatine. That's a little bit more reasonable than dodging a lot of the other decks that you might see. I do think Palpatine's a tougher matchup, right? Because when it's a blue-green or even a yellow Palpatine is going to probably have more answers than you later in the game. So deny those answers if you can. An overwhelming barrage in the middle of the game to clear all those pesky units off the board, to deny Palpatine the card draw, I'd say is more important than the Super Laser Blast in that matchup. Vigilance is a good option. Certainly can be helpful. In this deck, there are controlling elements, but in general, we're presenting threats more than dealing with threats from our opponent. So certainly could be good. No Glory Only Results is a great card, helps with Chewbacca's and Annihilators and stuff like that. But there is an argument to be made for putting Vigilance in that slot. And then Redemption is really potentially fun. I mean, you basically get to play this almost like you're playing Hero Blue. A lot of times Piett will be dead by this point, right? Because it's basically the same cost as a Devastator, right? It kind of costs 10 in this deck, but you're usually playing it at 9. I have had games where if I can just make it another turn, game over, right? Like Devastator has come out. The problem is Space Sentinels don't matter because my opponent's got a huge force on the ground, right? And Devastator or Redemption can buy you that turn. So it's a little spice. Your opponent probably won't see it coming, and if you play it, it'll probably win you the game, right? So it's worth thinking about. So here's one more look at the deck. I think at this point we've covered every card. We've covered sideboards for when to bring things in. It is a super fun deck. It's certainly beatable for sure. I think if I was playing in the big sector this week, this is probably what I would be playing because it's a lot of fun. And I'll mention too, right, that the Outlaw Corona Pilot Overwhelming Barrage route is probably not a super common one. You might play Interceptor Ace, and your opponent might still ping your Outlaw Corona because he or she doesn't know what Interceptor Ace does, right? And by the way, it's pretty powerful. It gives the ship grit, right? So your Outlaw Corona can turn from a 3/5 into a 5/8 with grit, which gets just real nasty if you can, swing into an opponent's, ship that has a pilot on it, because you will probably be bigger than their ship, right? So if they start A-wing Chewbacca, for example, you swing into it with your Outlaw Corona, you take 4 back, And now, instead of being a 5/8, you're a 9/8 with 4 damage on it, right? So it can get pretty silly. Sideboard like crazy. If you're playing against a blue deck and it's game 1, just resource the Outlaw Corona. Don't play it. And that's part of why there are some extra 2-drops in here, right? So even without the Outlaw Corona, you've got 7 playable 2-drops. And Prepare for Takeoff is not a terrible start either in this deck. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you give this deck a try. And if you try, I hope you do super well with it. Take care.